mysterious, armored, blind alien with a thirst for revenge on anyone who disturbs its slumber, or peace of mind, or silence. And the Taotie, a reptilian alien race of green-skinned carnivorous quadrupeds with large jaws and severe aggression. Which of these creatures would come out on top? The Quiet Place monsters, also known as the Death Angels, first made their appearance in John Krasinski's horror, A Quiet Place. These monsters were hostile, and like the Taotie, they came in on a meteor, or several meteors. All we know is at least one meteor was responsible for bringing these harbingers to Earth, because very shortly after the meteors make impact with the planet, the Quiet Place monsters just start their rampage. And the same can be said of the Taotie. The Death Angels have 4 limbs, and are very humanoid in appearance. They have a distinct head and a neck, and their body is laden with armor. Armor that apparently can withstand many projectiles via humans' weapons. Even very high caliber rounds don't seem to have any effect on the armor of the Death Angels. Bombs were used against them, and the only thing right now that the audiences are divided on is whether or not nuclear weapons could work on these creatures. But out of fear of not wanting to kill off the human population, they weren't used. At least that's what we're going with. The Quiet Place monsters seem more reactionary, going after anything that makes noise. They have superb hearing, which makes sense since they're unable to see. Wherever it is they came from, they might have lived in a very dark, rocky environment, or since they're based on bats, might have lived in cave-like areas on their planet, always submerged in the dark, where vision would have been obsolete, and where they would have needed superb hearing in order to hunt and even defend themselves against other things that might have wanted to eat them. These creatures are fast and very strong, and despite their figure, are very heavy. Their armor is so heavy that they're unable to stay afloat in deep water. They have very sharp teeth that they don't use to attack, but that adorn a mouth that they use to make their noises, presumably to also locate each other. They have plates on their head that open up similar to satellite dishes and try to triangulate sounds to see where their prey could be coming from. The only reason why they would do this, though, is when they're trying to really hear well. They usually don't make a point of opening up their heads unless they know they're safe or what they're hunting is in the distance somewhere, because as soon as they open up their heads, it reveals the softness inside, which makes them vulnerable. And only when they open up their heads is when you can kill them if you shoot, well, almost anything inside. They not only have the ability to run fast and to leap high, but they can also climb upside down, right side up, any which way you can think of by digging their very powerful claws into many surfaces, including thick metal. This most likely was an evolutionary adaptation on their planet if they had a very rocky surface, living on the dark side of a planet, or living subterraneously. Although I think they were more subterranean animals, because they also have another trait that's very scary. They're immune to fire.
What the fuck?
Literally, they can walk through fire the way we walk through a breeze. The Quiet Place monsters, at least on Earth, don't seem to eat what they kill. And after something stops making noise, they either leave the area or listen to see if anything else is making noise. Taotie appeared in the movie The Great Wall. They're highly aggressive and exist as a horde and almost like a hive mind. These creatures appear to look more canine in appearance, having 4 legs with a canine-like body structure and hair running down the dorsal side of their bodies, similar to that of a warthog. There are 3 different versions of these creatures, and each of them play a role. The ones most commonly seen and that the horde predominantly consists of are known as the soldiers. They number in the millions and are the size of full-grown lions. They have short tails with massive jaws. As a matter of fact, what looks to be their head, the moving part on the front of their bodies, seems to be 90% jaw and teeth, which can open up at almost a 90-degree angle. 2 large nostrils are pasted on the front side of the face, and there are no eyes. They do have eyes, but they're in a place that you would never ever think they'd be, unless you know the mythology. On their shoulders, near their necks. Yeah, because why not? They have very sharp claws that they use for tearing into the ground for traction, and they possess gill-like ridges on their backs, or the upper part of their necks, that vibrate when they're receiving orders. Then we have the Royal Guards, or the Queen's Guards, or bodymen, or escorts, or whatever you want to call them. These are the largest version of the Taotie. There are not many of them, only about 30 that are the size of elephants, but they basically look like large reptilian gorillas. Unlike the soldiers, they have eyes on their faces where they're supposed to be, and what really makes them stand out from the others monsters are their beautiful and large frills that can unfold to make a shield. This shield can be opened up like a flower and locked in place in order to protect the queen. These bodyguards are always with the queen, always forming a circle around her to protect her. They have flat faces with much smaller jaws than that of the soldiers, possibly to take damage. They are also the most heavily armored Taotie in the entire horde, and for good reason, because they are specifically the defense. They lack tails and have very tall and bulky forearms. These guys are the real deal, and they're not letting anything come past that they don't want to get in there. Then lastly, we have the most important Taotie and the most intelligent of all, the queen. 2 times bigger than the regular Taotie soldiers, but smaller than her royal guards, the queen is responsible for controlling this entire army of Taotie. She looks more reptilian or dinosaurian than the rest of them, and she also has a sort of frill. However, she differs from the others in that she has 2 appendages on the back of her head that can actually be erect when she wants them to make the membrane connecting them very taut in order for her to communicate long distances. It vibrates when she's giving orders, and no matter where the horde is, they can hear her. They will stop and listen and receive her orders with their little neck gills to see where they have to go. The Taotie are fiercely intelligent, and it seems as though the soldiers can think for themselves. However, they are completely dependent on the queen. If anything happens to her, they go into like this catatonic shock where they just don't move. They're still alive, but just unable to move or think for themselves at all. However, as long as she's alive, they can come up with strategies on their own individually as well. They know how to be stealthy and how to do anything possible to get at their prey. But the real intelligence lies with the queen, who is able to come up with strategies and tactics, and knows when to retreat when she knows that her horde is taking too much damage. She is the most important because not only does she command the army, but she's also responsible for replenishing them, as she is the only breeder. The soldiers are responsible for tearing everything in their path and eating as much as possible or bringing as much food as possible to the queen. She must metabolize this food very, very fast because armies upon armies come and feed her. And then when she's had enough, she goes away until 60 years later. Every 60 years, she comes out again like a haunting to wreak havoc on the earth, having replenished her numbers. We never see the queen or even her royal guards fighting. She specifically stays out of battle because she knows that if she's gone, they're done for. She's the last bastion for their species. We don't know the alien planet that they came from, but we know they were able to survive on a meteor to get here, possibly in a similar fashion to the way the Quiet Place monsters did. Even though the Taotie can be injured, they never seem to drop unless you specifically aim for their eyes on their shoulders. There have been many cases where people fighting them have stabbed them down the throat, in the head, and they just keep coming, even when they're caught on fire, which clearly is painful to them, but they just keep coming. The only thing that's for sure a definite death sentence is when their eyes are poked or impaled, or if their bodies are skewered or chopped up into pieces. The sheer veracity in which the Taotie attack makes them a fearsome horde. We have a little bit of backstory on the Quiet Place monsters and the Taotie. Let's put them up against each other. First, putting up one individual Quiet Place monster up against one of the Taotie soldiers. The Quiet Place monster would definitely attack right away, as the Taotie seem to be very loud. Of course, having seen this alien for the first time will not know that number 1, it's totally armored to the teeth, literally, and number 2, that making noise upsets it. The Taotie would fight with all its might, getting beaten and battered, and would actually last for a while. The Quiet Place monster would try tirelessly to kill this thing, not realizing that it would need to get an accurate shot to the eye or tear it straight in half for it to go down. The Taotie would take its jaws and try to slam them down on every inch of the Quiet Place monster, which would be a total fail. After realizing that it cannot kill the Quiet Place monster, the Taotie would probably just sit there staring at it, circling it, trying to find a point of weakness, which is a strategy that they've used before. Going for the head, the Quiet Place monster would quickly attack it and swing for the eye. It would miss. The Taotie would get very frustrated, wondering what the next course of action would be, but it grunting and moving back and forth would upset the Quiet Place monster, who would continue attacking it, finding soft parts in its body and starting to tear its flesh from its bones. After a while, the Taotie would get very tired and would probably retreat at this point. The Quiet Place monster would give chase, ripping the creature apart eventually, not just stabbing it in the eyes, but also tearing its body apart. Against the Royal Guard, the Quiet Place monsters would have a much harder time. The Royal Guard are creatures that are so heavily defended that they would know to keep their face towards the Quiet Place monster at all times. But where they would lose out is underestimating the agility and speed of the Quiet Place monster, which would far outclass that of the Royal Guard. The Royal Guards only need quick reflexes when it comes to opening up their frills. Their faces and frills are completely defended. However, their backsides and undersides are fair game. And with the Quiet Place monster slashing furiously, also trying to look for a point of weakness, to take down this thing that's making all this noise, the Quiet Place monster would eventually win. Surely enough, the royal guards would put up a fight, trying to use their weight to kick the Quiet Place monster off, which would work with them being so large. But their size would also work against them. These lumbering giants, although they can move very quickly in one direction, they are made for defense, not for evasion. The Quiet Place monster would quickly climb all over the body of this creature, stabbing it incessantly, eventually spilling its entrails, because the Quiet Place monsters don't stop until their prey is completely defeated. Next up would be the Queen. The Queen is very intelligent, and most likely, if she ever encountered one of these things, logically, she would not engage with them at all. But if she was caught by herself and didn't have her army at her disposal, and she had no choice but to fight, she would lose very quickly. Although no doubt the Queen could handle herself in most situations where she absolutely had to, against an armored truck-like creature like the Quiet Place monster, her claws and teeth would do nothing. She is built for breeding and for endurance and keeping up with the army, not for battle or close combat. The Quiet Place monster's claws would quickly find her neck, like a javelin slicing through some warm mud, and she would die much quicker than her royal guards and even than her soldiers. Now, what if we put the armies of Quiet Place monsters up against the Taotie monsters? Well, here are some things we have to figure. Even though the Taotie monster army was localized to one region in the movie, there were millions of them. From what we've seen from both Quiet Place movies, when the creatures are unleashed, there are many of them, but they don't look like a sea of organisms. Usually hive-minded, swarm-based alien hordes are very numerous. They usually have a queen, like in the case of the Taotie, that will continue reproducing to replenish her armies. And they literally throw their numbers at everything they have. The reason why the Quiet Place monsters aren't as numerous is because they were on a chunk of rock, or on several chunks of rocks coming from their planet. And these creatures, I may be wrong, also look like the type of creatures that didn't live in the most inviting planet. I've said before in several of my videos since I started making the Quiet Place monster videos that these creatures came from a hostile world. Hence why they are immune to fire. Hence why they're so heavily armored. They also lived in the dark, that's for sure, and I believe they probably lived underground, probably closer to lava pits. For all we know, they probably swam through magma. Well, not swim, but traverse. These creatures did not live in a situation where they were gonna get food all the time. So it wouldn't make sense for there to be too many of them, at least not in the number that we see the Taotie. They also don't function as a hive-minded creature. So unlike bees and ants and termites, there would be no need for there to be millions upon millions of worker status animals. Now we're just guessing this because of the little bit that we see. For all we know, on their world that might be the case. But what's clear is that the Quiet Place monsters in the movie will come to their neighbor monster's aid if they hear something going down, or maybe they're just reacting to the sound, but they each have a little area by themselves that they territorially defend. You'll notice throughout the movie that the Quiet Place monsters prefer to hunt alone. They prefer to be by themselves unless there is food or something that draws their attention. And even still, they're not actively communicating with each other or following one's order. They're acting individually of their own mind. They don't necessarily need to be with each other all the time, and they don't seem to be following an alpha. Biologically, this would mean that there's not as many numbers, and they would fill a niche more similar to that of a cougar or a tiger, and less like that of ants or bees. So when it came to numbers, the Taotie definitely have them beat. They would swarm the Quiet Place monsters, but initially it wouldn't work. The Quiet Place monsters would tighten up, and trying to pull their limbs apart, trying to crush them, would not work, and the Quiet Place monsters would quickly try to fight. Whereas the Taotie will retreat upon hearing their queen's orders, the Quiet Place monsters don't know what the word retreat means, unless of course a high frequency noise is emitted, which these Taotie don't do. Unless of course the queen can use this in her favor with the sound that she makes, but I doubt that's the case. After a while, the queen would pull back and realize that the Quiet Place monsters wouldn't stop. She would continue sending her soldiers after the Quiet Place monsters. And even though there are much less of the Quiet Place monsters in the Taotie would eventually get cut down very fast over a long period of time. The queen would try every single tactic she could think of, and eventually she would have to find a pool of water to go over to see if the Quiet Place monsters would follow. If she could do this, and the water is deep enough, the Quiet Place monsters possibly wouldn't drown, but would not be able to swim across unless they walk on the bottom. It's possible that in this scenario, the Taotie would just cut their losses and deem that this is not a creature that's worth even going up against, and they would stay clear of the Quiet Place monsters. But ideally, we're sadists. And we don't want these creatures to be able to escape. We want to lock them in a Super Smash Brothers map and just watch them duke it out to the end. The Taotie would fight, but nothing would work. The Quiet Place monsters would never open up their heads because when there is a threat inbound or close by, they never sleep, they are never tired, and will just continue chopping away with their very long, spiky claws that they use to go straight through metal into the bodies of these creatures. And even though the Taotie have armor as well per se, they don't have it all over their bodies. And it's possible that the claws on the Death Angels, aka the Quiet Place monsters, would be sharp and powerful enough to sling through. They would sashimi these Taotie monsters, and after a while, the Quiet Place monsters would eradicate them. It would be all the royal guards could do to continue running with the queen, who would be fearing for her freaking life, watching what's left of the Quiet Place monsters, which is, yeah, basically all of them, coming after her pell-mell without stopping. It would be a chase until the Quiet Place monsters eventually caught up to her and her royal guards, picking off each of them as time went by. The royal guards would then, one at a time, start staying behind to see if they can block the path of the Quiet Place monsters, which would do jack, because at this point there's way more Quiet Place monsters than there are of the royal guards and her queen. Now this would be a very long time, and something tells me that the fact that the Taotie monsters need to rest and retreat means that at some point, even though they have very high endurance, they do eventually get tired. And fighting and running for many days and weeks is probably going to tire them down so much where they'll just collapse. We've not seen this from the Quiet Place monsters. Not saying that they don't rest, but they seem to always be at the ready. Being hostile animals, it's possible they're always on the move, because if they stay in one place for too long, there are other creatures that could hunt them. Now the other side of it is they do rest, and they are stealthy, especially when they're trying to listen. But whatever passes for their adrenaline in the Quiet Place monsters keeps them going a long time. And we know this because of how fast they cleaned out the human population in the movies. They would have had to been attacking non-stop for them to decimate the human population the way that they did. Now ideally in the real world that probably wouldn't have happened, because people would have figured out that it's sound, so they know to use high sounds like we already do with pests. But the plot hole for humanity being decimated was needed for the movies to do well, I guess. Ideally, I think in time the queen would try to figure out something, because as they said in the movie The Great Wall, the Taotie adapt and learn. They retreat and they learn. They're always adapting, becoming more intelligent based on the prey that they're hunting. So in time, the queen and her royal guard, or let's say she has a little bit of the soldiers left, would realize if they stay still, the Quiet Place monsters don't do anything. So the queen would order her soldiers to not move until the monsters eventually went away. Or maybe she would lead an army away from her so that the Quiet Place monsters would follow after them. And after they're a far enough distance away, the queen would take what's left of her army and her royal guard and head back to their nest and stay up there for a while and replenish her army. I think in time she would learn that certain sounds would hurt the Quiet Place monster. Now, whether or not she would adapt to be able to make those sounds, I don't really know. But what's for sure is that the queen probably would survive in terms of her intelligence and being able to recognize the kind of creature this is. However, if it weren't for that, she would be killed off immediately. And in that, because she has to retreat and stay away from the Quiet Place monsters, they automatically win regardless. Unless the queen can figure out that sound hurts them and make a sound in exactly that frequency to hurt the Quiet Place monsters. So I will say, for sake of the information that we have right now, the Quiet Place monsters win. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Ultiori. You ask, we answer.